This week, number 14, is our first week on shapes and effects, and we will be taking a look, for example, at rounded shapes, including a circle, and also in the inside of a circle, we will be taking a look at what we can do here, for example, in terms of colors, and also in terms of shadows, and we will be taking a look at partial shadows. Shadows that do not cover the entire side of a box, instead only a certain part of a box. Ultimately, creating that effect, what we can achieve here is a corner of a box that looks like as if it was lifted up. And what we are also taking a look at are partial borders. Borders that also do not cover the entire side, as in the example right here. And we will also be taking a look at triangles. Triangles such as this one that is facing in a certain west, east, north or south direction, and also triangles that are facing a certain corner direction, meaning southwest or northeast, whatever that corner ultimately will be. And the properties that will be in use in this week are the properties where we left off at the end of last week. That is border radius, by which we can create rounded corners on a box. Then box shadow will be involved heavily in this week, by which we can create a couple of effects. And also the border property, by which, for example, we can create the triangles ultimately. And not only those properties will be in use, but also out of flow positioning. Quite a number of times we will need to position an element on top of another element in order to create that shape or that effect. Therefore, out of flow positioning, the position property and all its related properties right here will be in use in this week as well. And also the before and the after pseudo element selectors together with the content property, since with those ones we can actually create an element in CSS instead of relying on HTML. And the reason why we would do this in this scenario in this week, we will take a look at later on. So far, we have only been using them in regards to CSS counters. Meaning in this week, there is no new vocabulary, no new property that we will be introducing, but it will give us a very good understanding of current vocabulary in a new context, in the context of shapes and effects. And it will provide us the way for next week, by which we really need a solid understanding of out of flow positioning and also about the before and the after pseudo element selectors. Next week we will be going into transformations, by which we then will be rotating things, we will be skewing things, for example, we will be scaling things up and down, and ultimately we will be bringing our elements to life by letting them change over time using animations and transitions. Let us now get started by taking a look at rounded shapes, including circles. Therefore, I have created an element here which I have already given a couple of rounded corners. The top left and the bottom right corners are rounded. The other ones are exactly 0 still, and they are exactly the same. Therefore, I made use of two values here, by which the first one is referring to top left and bottom right, and the second one is referring to top right and bottom left. And here, as we have seen last week, we have complete control here of all the four corners separately or together by making use of either 1, 2, 3 or 4 values. And we have seen that each border, each corner is actually also further divided up into two parts. There is always a part that is reaching the corner from a horizontal way, that is the horizontal corner part. And then there is a corner part that is coming from the vertical side, that is the vertical corner part, of which we also have control over. Meaning ultimately we have control over 8 different parts, 4 corners, and each corner is divided up by 2 parts. And we do have that control if we make use of a forward slash here. And then once again, these second values can be used either with 1, 2, 3 or 4 values. And if we are making only use of one value, for example, then this is referring to all 4 corners and always referring to the vertical corner part of each corner. This one is the horizontal corner part. In this case also referring to all 4 corners, since we only made use of one single value here. And just by making use of all these values that we have available, that already gives us quite a number of options on what shapes we want to create. And we can also create a circle. And a precondition that must be met here is, first of all, that we need a square box. A box that has exactly the same width as is the height. And then we can make use of border radius and turn that value to exactly the half of the width or half of the height. And that ultimately gives us a circle. A more elegant value that we might want to use here is just 50%. That is the most common value that's being in use, of course, also referring to half the width or half the height. And what it is actually referring to, it is referring to 50% rounding of the vertical as well as the horizontal corner part of each corner that exists on a box. And that gives us a circle. Sometimes we may see out there even higher values. However, as soon as we are going for whatever higher value that is, it will not ultimately change anything. That is the maximum that we can go for, so that rounding would not go inwards somehow. We are still dealing with a circle. However, actually we are not dealing with a circle. It is just actually an effect. It is not really a shape, since we are still dealing with a box, and we can most likely identify this as soon as we are inserting a little bit of text inside those two shapes that we have just created. And that text is still being displayed outside, meaning we are still dealing with boxes. So what is getting rounded here is actually just the background color, nothing else. We still have a box here. Let us now do a little bit of repetition, and how can we center inline level content inside an element. And inline level content also includes text. So whether that be a inline box or inline level image, whatever, or text, for example, how can we get that inline level content, for example, in the center of the circle horizontally as well as vertically? And whenever we are dealing with inline level content, then we have access to those properties right here, which we have discussed in week number 5 or week number 4 it was. And here, for example, is text align, and by making use of the value of center for this text align property, then we can horizontally center inline level content. And if we are making use of the property of line height and set that value to the exact same value as the height of the element, then hereby we can vertically center our inline level content. And both of these properties are inherited for the reason that we cannot really select text, such as in our case. So let's assume that we are dealing with one line of text here, consisting, for example, of 2 words, and let's center those by using text align. So we cannot really select that text. What we are doing in this situation, we are selecting the element. That is what we always do inside CSS, and then it gets inherited down to the text. So we are giving those properties and those values to the parent element in which the text is inside, the text align center, which horizontally centers the text inside its element, and line height vertically centers that text if we are giving it the exact same value as the height. Let us now reload the page, and our text is right in the center. Let me do one more repetition on line height, what is actually going on here. Can we maybe remember the baseline? That is this invisible line on which always the inline level content or the text and any other inline level content sits on. And that baseline adjusts always. It is always situated at a location so that the current font size, the text in the current font size is always in the center. Meaning if we are increasing that text now, the baseline would move further down in order that that font size would still have half the gap on top, half the gap at the bottom, causing that text to be in the center. And that is what line height, what the baseline is doing here. And therefore we have now a line height of 150 pixel. Above is half the remaining space, and below is the remaining space, 150 pixel minus the size of the text. And above is half of it, and below is the other half. Meaning, if we are now inserting a second line of text, or any other inline level content, whatever that may be, then this tells us that the next line will be 150 pixels further down. Once again, here line height is 150 pixel. Half of that remaining space here of those 150 pixel subtracted the text size is on top, the other half is at the bottom. And if we are dealing with a third line, same thing happens. Now the other half of it will be on top again, the other half at the bottom. Meaning the solution here of using the line height property, that is not the solution anymore, since of course that text, what we want in this situation, it shall be right below each other, one line after the other, and the entire block of inline level content, the entire block of text in our situation shall be right in the center. A possibility we have already gotten familiar with in our week number 12, in which we have discussed tables. What we can ultimately do, we can turn our circle into a table element, into a table cell. Since inside a table cell, the content in there is always vertically aligned to the center. And this is because table cells, TH and TD elements, are the elements by which we create table cells. And those elements by default, what they have been given by the browser in his own default style sheet, they have been given a value for the display property of table cell. And in addition to this, they have been given the property vertical align with the value of middle. And vertical align with the value of middle, we are also making use of irrespective of whether we are dealing with a table cell, but only when we are dealing with one line of text or one line of inline level content. Let's assume that this box here is either a block or an inline level box, doesn't matter. And in there is, however, an inline level box. So this box is display inline block. Can still have a width and a height. How can we get this box right in the center here without making use of table cells? What we can do, the height of this gray box here is, for example, 400 pixels. All we need to do is we set the line height also to 400 pixels, and that will ultimately cause the text of the current font size to be right in the center. So the baseline will be adjusted in a way so that the text of the current font size is right in the center, which is approximately right here. If there was text on top of this baseline, it would be in the center. Now by default, inline level content, other than text, such as this box, which is inline block, this one would not be in the center. It would also sit on the baseline by default. So we have the option here to give exactly to that box here. We give it vertical align middle. And then this box will move away from the baseline. It will then move to the middle of the baseline. So this is the option that we have when we are dealing with one single line of inline level content. Let's, however, assume also in this situation that we are dealing here with multiple boxes going over two lines, for example. Then this option wouldn't, for the same reason as we have just discussed, it wouldn't work anymore, since the line heights, the next line would be further down here, 400 pixels further down. And here in this situation we have applied vertical align on the box itself, because vertical align is not an inherited property. And that is exactly the difference that is going on with table cells in this respect, that if we turn this box to display table cell, whatever is in here, whether it be content, inline level content or block level content, the entire content will be vertically aligned to the middle, and this vertical align property, vertical align middle, will be applied to the cell, to the table cell itself, and not to the content inside. So that is the difference going on here, since table cells behave in their own way. So this is what I briefly wanted to repeat in order for us to grasp the sense behind it. So all we need to do in this situation is we give this yellow circle display table cell and vertical align middle, and we are all set. But vertical align usually is given to the element itself that shall be vertically aligned. In this situation, since we are turning it to a table cell, there is a different behavior going on. Table cells have their own behavior. So let's make use of vertical align middle as well, besides display table cell. And let's also remove the line height, which is not required anymore. And this ultimately gives us our text is now right in the center, even though this text goes over multiple lines. And that is of course not only referring to text, any inline level content that we would have inside that circle would now be vertically aligned to the center. What we have just turned this box into is a table cell, and this is also the reason why I have given it a parent element. Why I have not just listed this element just as plain without any parent or with this section element being its parent. The reason is otherwise we will encounter some strange behavior. Since the browser always needs to know, hey, the parent, if this is the cell, then the parent of course must be the table. So this is how the browser thinks. And otherwise there will be a different behavior going on, a table unrelated behavior, things get mixed up here. So that is always the recommendation in this situation. And even myself, whenever I make use of it, I also immediately give the parent so that I have the immediate overview. I immediately give the parent either display table or display inline table. Inline table is just the inline version of a table. It's still behaving as a table, but on an inline level, meaning other elements can be